I think that is the big question out there. As you say, the stock is down 25% year to date. And by the way, one extra thing that we didn't speak about as well, this is including their 2 billion Swiss franc buyback that they announced at the beginning of the year. They've already completed about 650 million of that. So even with the buyback and even with decent results for the first 3 quarters of this year, the stock is still down 25%. And I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that, look, at the end of the day, UBS has undergone this huge transformation process already. We know that it's shifted away from its investment bank towards becoming one of the largest global private banks in the world. About half of their revenues nowadays do come from that private bank, but perhaps moving and pivoting away from the riskier, higher return on investment business is beginning to backfire a little bit. And investors want to see a little bit more. They want to see a bank that's taking on more risk, venturing into new markets, coming up with new innovative ways of enhancing some of their return on investments. And so far, we haven't really seen that. What we've seen is steady return on investments. And today is a good example of where they've actually outperformed versus expectations. Just to whittle into the numbers, actually, I thought it was interesting. Their global wealth management unit was up 4% year on year. So still exhibiting some growth there. Net new money was still positive to the tune of about 13 billion Swiss franc. But interestingly, their investment bank, which, as I just mentioned, has shrunk relative to the size of the overall operations, their revenue was up 44%, and a big chunk of that was on advisory revenues. They're up 42%. Now, why is this interesting? Because we know that the head of the investment bank, Mr. Andrea Orcel, has just left to go to Santander. So there are going to be a lot of questions about what happens to the future of UBS's investment bank with the departure of Mr. Orcel. Are we going to see change there? Are we going to see turnover? Are we going to see more focus on these advisory deals and getting into some of these large M&A transactions? Are we going to see a different type of strategy from Mr. Armotti? All of these questions I'll be putting to him in a couple of hours' time when I'll be sitting down with him. One last thing I should say, Steve, just on the broader macro, and you were picking up on that with Karen, I think, at the end of the day, these European banks are right at the heart of many of these negative macro stories that are being played out, whether it's the Italian budget, whether it's exposure to emerging markets, the Turkish lira, Argentinian peso for some of these banks, Brexit questions, and then also big questions about profitability in an environment of very, very low interest rates. We have the ECB meeting coming up later today. So European banks are grappling with all of these things together. It's difficult to see a very positive narrative for the sector as a whole, but looking at UBS's stock and their performance today, I would say that at least this should alleviate some of the idiosyncratic questions investors might have about this specific bank, at least for the short term.
In this type of mood music environment, let me ask you about a key departure, because having some certainty around personnel is quite key for a lot of investors wanting to do deals and wanting to invest money. And Andrea Orcel has left UBS, and that was the keynote departure, that he's going to Santander to become CEO. Do you think that's played a role in this decision to have an investor day to release results in London to try and shore up support around this departure? Because this man was effectively one of the likely successors down the track as well.
Potentially, Karen. I mean, in all the quarters I've been covering UBS, I haven't done an investor day in London, here in London. So it'll be interesting to see, and I definitely will be posing that question to Mr. Armotti. But it is one of the major questions that investors are asking here, what the future of that investment bank does look like with the departure of Mr. Orcel, and obviously what that's going to mean for the legacy of that bank, and as I mentioned, the transformation strategy that they've done. And we're at a very mature part of that process now. They're way ahead of their competitors in terms of redefining their business. Perhaps they've gone a little bit too far. They've gone a little bit too risk averse, weighing too much heavily on this wealth management business. And maybe going forward, and given that's where one of the bright spots is today, looking at those advisory revenue numbers, they may be lured and tempted to go back in there. I should also say yesterday, when you and I were looking at the Barclays results, again, there we saw some strength in the investment banking business. They were advisors on of the 3 largest M&A deals that happened in Europe for this quarter. So perhaps other banks are looking at that and saying, okay, well, there is M&A activity going on. The pipeline there is beginning to look a little bit more positive. 2019, maybe it is time to repivot back into that space. So lots of questions still, but certainly the future of the investment bank is a big one for UBS.
Hey everybody, it's Hadley Gamble from our new CNBC Middle East Bureau in Abu Dhabi. Thanks for stopping by. Now, to watch more, you can try one of the videos that just popped up on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe.